While World War II highlighted the dangers of totalitarianism, the U.S. faced a paradox. It fought against a nation with horrific racial and religious ideologies while grappling with its own internal struggles for racial equality and justice. African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, and other men and women of color in America were still treated differently, and initially were barred from aiding the war effort in meaningful ways. Their struggles and eventual contributions would shape not only the outcome of the war, but also the trajectory of racial relations in decades to come. When the United States joined World War II, the military was still split up along racial lines. African Americans were often referred into segregated units, facing discrimination and unequal treatment as they were ushered into support roles. For all people of color that desired to contribute to the war effort, becoming a pilot or joining combat operations was a rare chance. African American quartermaster soldiers defied expectations and were able to prove their worth in World War II as logisticians. One remarkable mission, the Red Ball Express of 1944, saw them traverse a grueling 700-mile supply route from Normandy to Paris. At its height, this vital lifeline delivered over 12,000 tons of crucial supplies daily to the front lines. Many of the bases and training facilities were located in the South, including Fort Huachuca in Arizona, the largest military installation for black soldiers. Despite the location, all bases maintained segregated amenities, such as blood banks, hospitals, barracks, and recreational areas for black soldiers. Unfortunately, racial slurs and harassment from white soldiers and local residents were a common occurrence. It wasn't until 1946 when President Harry Truman appointed an interracial committee to investigate the status of civil rights in America. The committee's final report denounced Jim Crow laws and suggested ending segregation. Finally, in 1948, Truman signed Executive Order 9981, ordering full integration for the armed forces. It was controversial and there was resistance, but this decision was momentous for racial equality in America.
As the war continued to grow, the growing of minority groups contributing to the war vastly grew. African Americans played a vital role in the fighting of the war. Before the desegregation of the military, various civil rights groups advocated for the implementation of black troops by adding black pilots to the ranks. But there was also advocacy for the involvement of other minority groups such as women and individuals from Asian descent. In 1940, American Secretary of War Harry Stimson greenlit a groundbreaking initiative to form an all-black 99th Fighter Squadron and establish an air base in Tuskegee, Alabama, known as the Tuskegee Airmen. By 1946, great amounts of African American pilots were trained and ventured on countless missions in Southern Europe, contributing to the war effort. These airmen faced immense challenges, losing 66 of their own while completing over 15,000 missions from 1943 to 1945. Although the 99th Fighter Squadron was a major representation of black troops during World War II, there were various other notable black troops that were important to American success in the war. An example of this is Buffalo Soldiers, who were the first African American combat infantry to be landed overseas. Buffalo Soldiers were praised for their success in pushing the Germans far into northern Italy. The Buffalo Soldiers are mainly praised for their great significant contributions to the war despite being discriminated against within the U.S. military. Hispanic Americans made significant contributions to the United States during the World War II. Through various military branches, Hispanic Americans began enlisting to help fight for America. During the 1940s, the United States government made great efforts to enlist the help from Hispanics by initiating several programs to recruit workers from Mexico, known as rancheros. As the preparations for war quickly accelerated, minority groups such as Hispanics hoped they would benefit from new jobs in the military and began enlisting with a better life in mind. As more Hispanics began joining the fight, the 88th Infantry Fighting Unit was created, which was composed of a very diverse group of soldiers, including Hispanics. Within the 88th Infantry, Hispanic soldiers served in various array of roles, such as working in combat and/or medical.
With the war beginning and most men off fighting, women took a larger role in jobs that might previously have been reserved for men. This took a large step towards female patriotism. Rosie the Riveter was the face of this new woman in the 40s and resembled a woman who could work in factories, join the Red Cross, or even join the military. During the war, over 200,000 women joined the military, which created women's branches. Women's Army Corps, WASP, and WAVES were all created during this period to separate women from the combat battlefield. However, by 1948, there was no segregation allowed in the military following the war after many complaints during this period. While there was an uprising in female patriotism, there was still oppression for African American women who were given the last order of employment. Along with this, following the war, or with the return of men, most women lost their jobs and returned to their lifestyle as housewives.
Americans welcomed new economic and job opportunities after the Great Depression. Rapid expansion forced leaders to confront discriminatory hiring practices. In June of 1940, President Franklin Roosevelt created the National Defense Advisory Commission to create equitable employment for all Americans in the defense industry. In June 1941, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People started a National Defense Day to protest discrimination of African Americans in government hiring. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802, forbidding racial discrimination in government hiring and training programs to avoid escalating tensions during this critical time. The order was set up by the Fair Employment Practice Committee, making it the first federal initiative to champion equal opportunity and combat workplace discrimination in the United States.
Asian Americans were treated poorly during this period. When Roosevelt called Executive Order Number 9066, this meant that any government officials could forcefully remove anyone who could be thought a threat. Many Japanese Americans were arrested in late January 1942 and transferred to internment camps in Montana, New Mexico, and North Dakota. Often, their families had no idea of their whereabouts for weeks. Some internees were reunited with their families later in relocation centers. However, many remained in justice camps for the duration of the war. More than 120,000 Japanese Americans were held in these camps. This was quite ironic during the war. While these camps were more humane than German internment camps, it still wasn't a comfortable way to live. Overall, $4 million of land was lost, and they were often separated from their families. Japanese Americans were held in these camps for most of the war and had to take loyalty tests to prove that they were not loyal to Japan.
It wasn't until 1946 when President Harry Truman appointed an interracial committee to investigate the status of civil rights in America. The committee's final report denounced Jim Crow laws and suggested ending segregation. Finally, in 1948, Truman signed Executive Order 9981, ordering full integration for the armed forces. It was controversial and there was resistance, but this decision was momentous for racial equality in America.